When was the last time you made a decision that was truly your own? Really think about that for a second. Not a decision based on fear, not a reaction to someone's words, someone's tone, someone's silence. Not something you did because it felt safe or familiar or expected. No, I mean a decision born purely from your own internal clarity. If you're honest, it's hard to remember, isn't it? You see, most people live their lives believing they're in control, that their thoughts, preferences, and desires are their own. But what if I told you that control itself is an illusion sold to you since birth? What if your entire sense of agency has been carefully shaped, not by force, but by design? It starts early. As a child, you're rewarded for obedience, punished for defiance. You learn to associate approval with conformity. Then school teaches you which questions are acceptable and which should never be asked. By the time you reach adulthood, you've been shaped not into a thinker, but into a follower who feels free. And the brilliance of it, you were never chained. You were never shouted at. You were simply nudged subtly, repeatedly silently, until the path they wanted you to take felt like your own. You were groomed to mistake influence for independence, to confuse suggestion for choice, to believe that the decisions you made were yours, when in truth they were planted. This isn't conspiracy, this is psychology. And if you're brave enough to keep listening, I'll show you the architecture of the world you thought you understood. Because there are people right now who are pulling strings behind the scenes. And if you can't see the strings, that doesn't mean they aren't there. It just means you were never meant to. You believe you're in control, that your thoughts are your own, that your choices reflect your unique identity, your goals, your truth. It's a comforting belief, one that gives life structure, pride, and purpose. But here's a reality you're rarely invited to confront. Most of what you think you've freely chosen has already been chosen for you. Not with chains or force, but with invisible threads that pull at your mind every single day. From childhood, you've been exposed to a system designed not to imprison your body, but to colonize your judgment. You were taught what success looks like, what love should feel like, what kind of life is worth chasing. And yet you never questioned who planted those definitions in your mind. The schools didn't teach you how to think, they taught you what to believe. The media didn't reflect reality, it curated it, filtered it, spun it until you accepted their version as yours. You learned to consume, to react, to conform, all while thinking you were acting independently. But what you call your opinion is often just a reflection of your programming. And here's the brutal truth: the most effective control is not physical, it's psychological. The perfect manipulation is one you never notice, because once you see the cage, it stops working. But if you're blind to it, you will defend it, protect it, even fight for it, thinking it's freedom. So ask yourself, why do you want what you want? Is it instinct? Is it passion? Or is it suggestion that's been repeated so many times? You mistook it for desire. This is not meant to shame you, it's meant to awaken you. Because once you realize your thoughts have been influenced, you finally gain the power to reclaim them. The first step to real freedom is brutal. You must admit that you've been living a lie. Not because you're weak, but because the system was designed to make you believe it was all your idea. You expect manipulation to look like domination, loud voices, coercion commands. You imagine the manipulator as someone overt, aggressive, obvious. But that's the lie you've been sold. The real manipulators are silent. They don't shout, they whisper, they don't force, they guide. The most powerful form of control is not the kind you resist, it's the kind you never even notice. And that's the danger. Because when someone yells at you, when they demand obedience, your defenses rise. But when they suggest, when they plant a seed so softly you think it was your idea, you lower your guard. You feel in control while being steered from within. This is what makes true manipulation terrifying. It doesn't look like control. It looks like free will. It masquerades as your own thoughts, your own convictions, your own emotions. A subtle pause, a calculated compliment, a strategic moment of silence, a half smile that triggers your insecurity. These things don't feel like control, but they are. They're the fingerprints of someone who knows how to shape human behavior without ever touching the surface. And the worst part, you've already experienced it. You've changed your mind before without knowing why. You've felt strongly about something only to later realize you were reacting to a feeling that wasn't entirely yours. That's not weakness, it's psychology, it's human. But once you see the pattern, once you recognize the architecture behind influence, you can't unsee it. The world starts to look different. Conversations feel layered. Words carry weight. You begin to ask yourself, who is really speaking through me right now? And that's when it gets dangerous. Because when you realize how easily you can be moved, the next question is, what if I became the one who moves others? True power is not about being seen, it's about being felt. The ones who shape the world don't force it, they bend it invisibly from the shadows. Power, as most people imagine it, is theatrical. It's the booming voice in the boardroom, the commanding general, the dominant personality who takes control of the room. That image has been glamorized in film media and leadership books, but it's misleading. Because the most influential people in this world don't raise their voices. They don't demand attention. They don't tell others what to do. In fact, they often appear calm, soft-spoken, and even invisible. And yet somehow everyone around them moves in accordance with their will. Why? Because true power doesn't impose, it induces. It doesn't scream, it seduces. You see, manipulation isn't about confrontation, it's about suggestion. Real influence operates below the surface. It bypasses resistance by making the target feel like they've made the decision themselves. When someone feels forced, they naturally push back. But when they believe the idea is theirs when they arrive at it on their own, they'll defend it, act on it, and even evangelize it. That's not control through dominance. That's control through design. This is why the real winners in the game of life don't chase applause. They craft perception. They understand that people aren't moved by pressure. They're moved by emotion, identity, and belief. These individuals embed their will into the environment, into language, into silence. They let others take credit, remain unseen, and yet everything moves around them like they're pulling the strings because they are. But there's a subtle beauty and cruelty in this. When done perfectly, the manipulated feel free. They feel empowered. They feel proud. And that's what makes the manipulator so powerful, because no one resists what they can't recognize. So the next time you see someone quietly watching, not speaking much, not demanding anything, but somehow everything still flows their way, don't underestimate them. Chances are you're not watching a passive presence. You're watching a master of silent influence. And they're not playing the game. They're writing its rules. If you want to control people, don't waste your time trying to control everyone. That's the first psychological law of real influence. The truth is, most people aren't worth manipulating, not because they're strong, but because they're irrelevant to your outcome. The real game begins when you identify the few who matter, the impressionable ones, the ones who silently crave direction but refuse to admit it. These are the people who appear confident, but underneath they're searching for certainty, for clarity, for someone to show them the way without ever exposing that need. And when you find them, you don't command them. You don't tell them what to do. You guide them subtly, strategically. You drop suggestions like seeds, a comment here, a hesitation there. You let the idea marinate inside them. Let them come to the conclusion you've already chosen for them. And when they arrive at it, it won't feel like manipulation. It will feel like clarity, like truth, like a breakthrough. Because they'll believe it was their own discovery. And that's the beauty of psychological control. When done well, it feels like autonomy. Resistance vanishes when people feel like they're in charge. They will fight you if you try to make them do something. But if they believe it's their own idea, they'll carry your agenda with passion. They'll defend it. They'll spread it. Not for you, but for themselves. Understand this, and you'll never need to shout again. You'll never need to beg or plead or convince. The human mind despises commands, but it worships its own ideas. Learn to plant yours, because control isn't about domination. It's about permission borrowed, not taken. And once someone gives you that access, you own the path they'll walk without ever taking a single step yourself. The greatest threat to control isn't rebellion, it's unity. A single voice of dissent is manageable. But a group aligned in vision and bound by purpose is a force that can tear down empires. History proves it. Revolutions don't begin with noise. They begin with cohesion. The moment people realize they share the same frustration, the same wound, the same target, they become dangerous. They stop whispering and start organizing. And that's when power starts to crack. That's why the most effective way to maintain control isn't to silence your enemies, it's to turn them against each other. You don't need to destroy resistance. You just need to make sure it never unifies. Fragment it, fracture it, poison it from within, plant doubt, fuel competition, nudge egos, and then step back. Let them implode. Because the truth is, most groups don't fall to outside pressure, they crumble under internal conflict. A whisper of suspicion, a perceived betrayal, a clash of pride. These are all it takes to turn allies into adversaries. And once that bond is broken, they won't be looking at you anymore. They'll be too busy defending themselves from each other. Governments have used this tactic for centuries. Politicians know that the easiest way to hold power is to keep the people distracted, not with truth, but with conflict. Get them to argue over ideologies, identity, morality, and they'll never unite long enough to challenge the real source of their oppression. When the battlefield is filled with infighting, no one marches toward the throne. So if you want to stay untouchable, don't focus on crushing the crowd. Focus on dividing it before it finds its voice. Power doesn't fear noise. Power fears harmony, because 100 voices screaming in chaos will cancel each other out, but 10 voices speaking in unison. That's revolution. Control isn't about silencing, it's about scattering. Divide them and you'll never need to run. They'll be too busy running from each other. You've been taught to believe that people are rational, that logic leads and emotion follows, that decisions are made after weighing facts, analyzing pros and cons, reaching thoughtful conclusions. But that belief is a comforting myth, one that crumbles the moment you look closer. Because in truth, people rarely act from reason. They act from feeling, from fear, from desire, from pain, pride, nostalgia, or desperation. Logic may justify a choice, but it never makes it. Emotion does. Every time. You've seen it. People defending beliefs they can't explain. Voting for leaders who speak to their gut, not their mind. Falling in love with ideas, products, movements, not because of evidence, but because it feels right. That's the hidden engine behind human behavior. Not intelligence, not data, but emotion. And those who understand that the true influencers never argue with facts. They speak directly to the emotional core. So if you want to move someone, don't try to change what they think. Change what they feel. If they feel urgency, they'll act. If they feel threatened, they'll retreat. If they feel proud, they'll protect what gave them that pride. Emotion bypasses the critical mind. It makes people act before they understand why. That's why advertising rarely gives you raw data, it sells you a story. That's why political speeches are written to stir outrage, hope, or fear, not to present statistics. And once you've tied your idea to an emotion, once it becomes not just what they believe, but how they feel, it becomes nearly untouchable. Because now to challenge the idea is to challenge the feeling. And people don't let go of what makes them feel powerful, or safe, or seen. This is the hidden truth. Manipulators live by logic, moves thoughts, but emotion moves actions. If you can make someone feel something deeply enough, they'll do what you want and believe it was their idea all along. You can't change a person's mind with a single moment. The human psyche resists anything unfamiliar, anything sudden, anything that challenges the internal order it clings to. That's why true influence doesn't happen all at once. It's not a lightning strike, it's a slow erosion. A quiet drip that carves its way through stone. And for that, you need 3 elements: exposure, repetition, and emotional connection. First comes exposure. The unfamiliar is threatening, but the known becomes safe. So you introduce the idea gently and directly. You don't declare it, you suggest it. You let it pass like a shadow in conversation. You imply rather than explain. And as the idea shows up again and again, it becomes less foreign. The brain begins to normalize it. Resistance fades not through force, but through presence. Then comes repetition. Not just the same words over and over, but the same message reframed through different angles. Familiarity creates perceived truth. It doesn't matter if the message is rational. If it echoes often enough, it begins to feel real. The mind is lazy. It confuses what is repeated with what is right. And so the repeated lie becomes indistinguishable from the accepted fact. But none of that sticks unless emotion is involved. Without feeling, ideas pass through the mind like smoke. But attach the idea to a deep human emotion, fear, pride, longing, shame, and it roots itself. It takes hold. Because now it's no longer just a thought, it's an experience. It's part of their identity. That's the formula. Not manipulation through argument, not persuasion through power, but transformation through patience. Present the idea, repeat it, make them feel it, and eventually it won't be your idea anymore. It'll be theirs. And that's when you win, not because you controlled them, but because they never realized you were there. People can change their opinions, they can admit a mistake, they can evolve their preferences, even challenge a belief. But what they will almost never change without immense resistance is their identity. Because to challenge what someone believes is uncomfortable. But to challenge who they are, that's war. That's psychological death. That's a threat to the entire scaffolding that holds their world together. And this is where the deepest form of manipulation takes place, not at the level of thoughts, but at the level of self. If you truly want to control someone, don't just tell them what to believe. Make your belief become a part of who they are. Make it feel personal. Make it feel like a reflection of their soul. Because when people feel like an idea defines them, they will defend it with intensity. Not because they love the idea, but because abandoning it would mean abandoning themselves. Think about it. Have you ever seen someone fight for a cause they barely understand? Argue for a political view they can't articulate, believe something they've never questioned, and rage when it's questioned? That's not logic. That's identity defense. And once an idea becomes part of someone's sense of self, you no longer have to control their behavior. They will police themselves. They will protect the cage as if it were freedom. That's why master manipulators don't debate. They don't confront. They embed. They attach ideas to pride, to belonging, to meaning. And once the idea is sewn into a person's identity, it becomes immune to logic. You can't argue someone out of who they believe they are. You'd be attacking their dignity, their history, their very existence. And that's the final battlefield, not the mind, but the self. Win there, and you don't just win the moment. You own the person, because the most powerful control doesn't feel like control. It feels like being yourself even when that self was never truly yours. At first, manipulation feels like power, like clarity, like control. You start to see the mechanics behind people's choices, their fears, their insecurities, their emotional triggers, and you learn to pull those strings with precision. You stop reacting and start directing. You shape conversations. You influence outcomes. You begin to feel untouchable. But here's what no one tells you the higher you climb. In control, the further you drift from connection. Because once you understand how easy it is to guide others, you stop trusting anyone, including yourself. You begin to look at people not as humans, but as systems. Predictable, programmed, manipulatable. You analyze every interaction, dissect every word, search for motives behind every smile. The magic of life's spontaneity, innocence, vulnerability slowly disappears. You no longer ask, does this person care about me? You ask, are they responding to my influence? And that question never leaves you. Because when you master manipulation, you also master suspicion. Worse yet, it doesn't stop with others. It turns inward. You begin to question your own emotions. Was that love or strategy? Was that connection or leverage? When you've trained your mind to shape others, it becomes harder to experience anything authentically. Even your own joy starts to feel like calculation. And that is the hidden price of power: psychological isolation. You don't just control others, you estrange yourself. You stand above the crowd, but the view becomes cold, empty, echoing with your own doubts. Because what began as power over others slowly becomes a loss of something deeper: trust, vulnerability, and peace. So yes, manipulation can work. You can win. You can build an empire of influence. But you must ask yourself, are you ready to pay the price? Because the moment you play with people's minds, you start to lose touch with your own. You can master every strategy, understand every psychological trigger. Learn to influence, silently to manipulate, without a trace to bend people's decisions until they walk exactly where you want them to, smiling. But even then, you'll never have total control. Because beneath every calculation, beneath every perfectly planted idea, lies a variable that no method can tame: human chaos. emotion, transformation, awakening. These things erupt without warning, and they can shatter everything. You might move someone like a pawn for years, until one day they wake up with a realization you didn't plan for. A surge of anger, a moment of clarity, a tragedy, a spiritual shift. And in that instant, all your quiet work unravels. People are not machines. They are storms. And no matter how skillful you are, some storms can't be predicted, only survived. That's the paradox. The more you seek to control the world, the more you realize how little control you truly have. You can dominate the board master, the pieces, but you cannot rule the human soul. Not forever, because consciousness evolves, pain transforms, and the same person you once shaped so easily can one day become the one who sees through you. History is full of brilliant manipulators who believed they were untouchable until someone else learned the game. Someone younger, sharper, or more ruthless. Power never stays in one set of hands. The same tactics you use today will be used against you tomorrow. And when that happens, you won't see it coming because it will feel just like your own idea. So the question isn't whether you can control others. You can. The real question is, can you survive the consequences of doing so? Because once you begin pulling the strings, you stop being part of the play. You become the director, the architect, the puppeteer. And history has shown us this one final truth. Puppeteers don't die peacefully. They're hanged by their own strings. At some point, you must stop asking, how do I influence others, and start asking, who is influencing me? Because the greatest danger isn't being manipulated, it's never realizing you were. In a world flooded with persuasive messaging, curated content, targeted ads, and emotionally engineered algorithms, your thoughts are constantly being shaped, subtly, silently. And if you don't become aware of that process, you'll live your entire life thinking you're free while following a script written by someone else. That's the first real freedom: awareness. Not rebellion, not noise, awareness. The ability to step back from your thoughts and ask, do I actually believe this? Or was I taught? To do I want this life? Or was it marketed to me? Is this my voice or an echo? But there's another side to this lesson, and it's just as critical: the temptation to control. Because once you understand how easily people can be guided, how emotion trumps logic, how identity resists change, how repetition creates belief, it's tempting to use that knowledge, to manipulate, to pull strings. And maybe you can, maybe you will. But power always comes with a cost. The more you use it on others, the more it uses you. You stop trusting, you stop connecting, you stop believing in the authenticity of anything, even your own feelings. Influence is seductive, but it's also corrosive. And if you're not careful, the same strings you use to control others will become the ones that quietly hang you from within. So here's the real advice. Learn the game. Understand the tactics, but never forget your humanity. Because the point isn't to become a better manipulator, it's to become harder to manipulate and strong enough not to need it.